When Bill Seitz talks, people tend to stop and listen. The senator from Cincinnati is well known for his strong command of pretty complex issues and also for some pretty entertaining floor speeches. He's chairman of the Senate Public Utilities Committee. He is heavily involved in the energy policy in this state. He joins us today to talk about that in today's caucus conversation. Senator, thanks so much for being here today.
Enjoy being with you, John.
So before we get into this new bill that's introduced, I think it's fair to point out you have been working on energy efficiency and energy legislation for quite some time. Can you just give us a lay of the land as to where we are right now in terms of energy policy in Ohio?
Sure. In 2008, the legislature passed, as part of a very large bill, two mandates. First, mandating that 25% of Ohio's power by 2025 must be generated from renewable and advanced sources of energy. And second, mandating that utility companies must sell 22% less power by 2025 through paying for energy efficiency programs to help their customers become more energy efficient. When we passed that law in 2008, we operated on a set of assumptions that have proven to be false. The biggest game changer has been the discovery of copious quantities of natural gas in Ohio, the best economic news that Ohio's had in decades. And natural gas is cheaper than these mandated sources of electricity, and that has really changed the landscape. We also thought we would have to build new generating plants. We don't. The Great Recession took hold. Power demand has been flat or stagnant. And so we're undertaking a 5-year review, which is now stretched into the 6th year, to find out whether those assumptions should be changed as we go forward. And we're now pursuing, just finished 6 hours worth of hearings just today on a new bill that will call a temporary timeout as we move through towards 2025. We're going to maintain the progress that we've already achieved on those two issues, renewables and energy efficiency, but we're going to call a timeout and a moratorium on further marches down towards these goals while we create a study committee that will look at this even more comprehensively than I've been able to do in the last year and a half through literally hours and hours of testimony. And one thing's very clear. Proponents of the mandates and opponents of the mandates look at the world through a very different set of lenses. Those that are benefiting from the government mandate that their products be purchased like the mandates. Those that are paying for the mandates, which is Bob and Betty Buckeye and the backbone of our industrial strength in Ohio, don't like the mandates. They're not benefiting from them. They're paying hundreds of millions, now upwards over $1 billion in hidden electricity taxes to fund the renewable green energy vision of our friends in the environmental movement. And we're calling timeout in this new bill while we try to work a way forward that considers the new realities of our copious quantities of natural gas and the other changes in the electricity landscape since 2008.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Before we get into the big details, you mentioned Bob and Betty Buckeye. $1 billion spent on energy efficiency programs. Do we have any idea as to what the benefit of that has been?
We don't have a clear idea of what the benefit has been, because the way they calculate that these things are cost effective is they look at how much is being spent today, and they are projecting benefits out over many, many years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. I don't think anybody can come up with an accurate forecast of 10 or 15 years down the line. If you can, I would like to know what stock you're buying today. So we don't have a good, clear impression of whether the costs outweigh the benefits because of the way in which we currently calculate the cost-benefit analysis. I think we need better ways of calculating the cost-benefit analysis. That's one of the things that the study commission no doubt will determine and make recommendations on.
So we're talking about a freeze, at least the current legislation, Senate Bill 310, right, sponsored by Senator Troy Balderson, but it's in your committee.
Right.
It's a freeze. What are those numbers right now?
Right now, we have accumulated 4.2% reduction in power demand. as a result of energy efficiency, and 2.5% of our power supply is coming from renewable energy. That figure was supposed to go to 12.5% by 2025, and we're stopping at the 2.5 level while we take this time out. On energy efficiency, that number was supposed to be 22% by 2025. We're stopping at 4.2% while we take the time out. And that's what we're doing. So we're preserving the gains that we've made. Those people that have entered into contracts to fulfill that level of demand will be protected. But we're going to call a moratorium, a freeze, if you will, on further proceeding down this path, which, as I say, was charted on a very different set of assumptions made 6 years ago that have proven to be largely false. We are joining the state of Indiana, for example, which just last week repealed altogether their energy efficiency mandate. The Indiana House and Senate passed a bill that did that. Governor Pence let it go into law just last week. So all around the country, folks that had started down this path in the mid-2000s are beginning to have second thoughts over whether the costs do exceed the benefits, and they're beginning to run away from these expensive forms of energy, as already they've done in Europe, which is far more into the renewables game than we ever became. But Europe is running away from those standards because they're finding their electricity prices are going up astronomically. And the Germans are now saying we can't even compete globally with countries that have no mandates at all. American business is in the same boat. Some of our largest manufacturers in this state, U.S. Steel, Alcoa, Timken, the large automotive companies, GM, Chrysler, Ford, have asked for relief. Timken Company testified just yesterday that they're paying upwards of $3 million a year for programs from which they derive no benefit. And Timken's competing globally. They're competing with Chinese and Indians that have none of these mandates. They're still burning coal over there. And so we need to be mindful of the need to be competitive with other states. Half the states have no energy efficiency mandate. 20 states have no renewable power mandate. Our industries in Ohio need to compete with those states. And so we're saying freeze it, call a moratorium, call a timeout, and we're going to continue to look at this very, very closely, hearing from all sides, as we've patiently done for a year and a half.
You talked about the different states and kind of what their standards or lack of standards are. Without getting into too many details, it's probably fair to point out to viewers that the way the energy system works, it's not just all Ohio energy that's made here in Ohio, used here in Ohio. There's this larger market, and so if you have these difficult standards and other states don't, you have Bob and Betty Buckeye subsidizing other states, other consumers in other states.
That's correct. One of the experts from whom we took testimony indicated that 80% of the benefit of the energy efficiency mandate is being exported to the other 12 states that are part of our grid. Ohio is linked into a 13-state grid called PJM. And this expert calculated that 80% of whatever benefits there is are being exported to other states that either don't have mandates or don't have mandates as onerous as ours are.
I mean, when you go and you flip on the lights, the power is going to be there. What we're talking about in terms of these renewables and energy efficiency doesn't necessarily affect whether or not you're going to get power.
Oh, that's right. I mean, look, the electric business is a good business. The power is on 99.97% of the time. These new forms of expensive energy are intermittent. The wind only works when the wind blows. The sun only works when the sun shines. And these new forms of energy are displacing the baseload plants that we've relied on for years to keep those lights on. So what we're trying to do is diversify our energy portfolio in a responsible way, but at least cost to the ratepayer, because many of, particularly our low-income people, struggle to pay that electric bill. They don't want hidden electricity taxes on their bill. They're too busy worrying about where their next meal is going to come from. They cannot afford to continue to pay the escalating costs of compliance with this newfangled vision that some of our environmentalist friends have relentlessly pursued, almost as if it were a religion, and it's working to the disadvantage of lower income people. My electric bill, I'm comparatively wealthy. I don't care that much. But if you are the lower income people, you are paying a hidden electricity tax. That's one of the other features of this new bill. We're directing the Public Utilities Commission to find a way to tell consumers what you are paying to pursue this green energy vision. And that will provide some transparency to this whole exercise, and then we'll let Bob and Betty decide what they want to continue to pay, whether they want to continue to pay higher prices for electric through pursuing these mandates, or whether they want cheaper electric delivered from reliable baseload sources.
Real quickly, what's the timeline for getting this bill passed?
It's my hope that we will be in a position, having heard these issues for a year and a half, to vote this out of committee very early in May or sometime next month at the latest, because our industries are crying, pleading for help. The two largest industrial energy groups in the state have been crying and pleading for help for over a year. And it's important to our industrial competitiveness. It's important to Bob and Betty that we provide them some rate relief.
Senator, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
A record tax cut, nearly $1 billion for schools, plus a freeze on tuition. The Senate passes the new biennium budget this week from the Ohio Senate. After more than 8 hours of debate on the Senate floor, this 4,000-plus page document is now passed by the Senate. This is the actual Senate budget bill. Inside, across-the-board tax cuts across every tax bracket of 6.3%, $1.7 billion worth of tax cuts. Also, a 2-year freeze on college tuition and $240 million more for higher education. It is something the Senate President, Keith Faber, is very proud of.
First of all, I'm proud of the Senate and my colleagues. We took a tough stand. We wanted to reduce state spending. We wanted to make sure we returned what wasn't essential to the taxpayers.
The budget invests heavily in education, making a $240 million commitment to higher ed, combined with the 2-year tuition freeze, and universities answering President Faber's challenge to find 5% savings within their own budget.
Probably the key word is not just affordability and investment, it's opportunity. We have students now who will want to stay in Ohio because they have an opportunity for a more affordable college education, which will then yield to more job opportunities here in this state.
The Senate invests nearly $1 billion, $935 million into K-12 education. All of Ohio's 614 districts will receive at least the same amount of funding they did this school year. The Senate's mission is to fund students with a per-pupil-based formula. With that, the goal is to transition more districts from caps and guarantees. Caps limit the amount of funding a growing district receives, while guarantees grant a district losing students the same level of funding.
We, again, are trying to get sustainability and structural balance in the school funding formula, and even with a guarantee, the number of districts on a guarantee are drastically reduced from current state law provisions, and there are only about 100 districts out of the well over 600 districts will be on a guarantee by the end of fiscal 17 with this budget proposal that we have, and I believe most school funding experts should say that's a victory.
A victory for stressed out parents, students, and teachers. The budget bill includes recommendations from the Senate Testing Advisory Committee, reducing the statewide achievement test to just once a year.
The message is very clear to the legislature that they want it shorter, they want it in one window, they want better technology, a couple of other suggestions, but I think we're going to see a much better environment next year.
The budget bill provides a record tax cut, cutting every Ohioan's income tax bracket by 6.3%. Small businesses also would pay no tax on the first $250,000 of revenue, and anything over that would be taxed at a flat 3%.
3% after that. Remember, the big businesses don't pay any of this. Small businesses also need to be moved towards that level playing field. It is going to make a difference. 70% of the jobs in this state are created by small businesses. This is trying to put them in a position to grow and be successful.
The Senate strived for a responsible, solvent, and sustainable budget, which instead of spending billions more, sends $1.75 billion back to the taxpayers.
But in the end, I always side on the side of you keeping more of your money because you're going to invest it and spend it better on your family.
And from here, this 4,000-page document goes to what is called a conference committee, 6 members, 3 from the House, 3 from the Senate, that will iron out all the changes to come together with one uniform bill. For all the very latest changes on where the budget document stands, you can tune into our social media channels. That is at Ohio Senate GOP, at Ohio Senate GOP. You can also find it on the web, and that is ohiosenate.gov/Republicans. And remember, by law, this budget has to be signed into law by the governor by the end of business on June 30th. I'm John Fortney from the Ohio Senate. Log on and register to vote online. Relief for families taking care of a disabled loved one, plus the final changes to the 2-year budget bill this week from the Ohio Senate. Busy week for the Ohio Senate and the House as the conference committee passed the omnibus budget changes. It's called conference committee. At 2:30 in the morning on Thursday morning, they passed those changes that unified the budget bill. Inside, $1.8 billion in tax cuts, also more than $930 million for K-12 education. And it's a plan that uses the Senate school funding formula.
It is important, and the reason it's important is we're building on stability and consistency from where we were just 2 years ago. That needs to be predictable for school districts. But remember, our plan funds kids. It doesn't fund adults, it doesn't fund buildings, it funds kids. And that's what we ought to do in Ohio.
Registering to vote is about to go high-tech. Once signed into law, the Senate passed a bill giving people the ability to register to vote online. Working with President Faber and Secretary of State John Husted, Senator Frank LaRose sponsored the bill designed to save millions in paperwork and improve voter security.
It's a much more error-free and fraud-free way of doing registrations.
Because we'll make it convenient for voters to register. We make it more secure because it's essentially photo ID at the point of registration, and it saves millions of dollars for local governments because no longer do they have to do the data entry manually. We can upload it to the voter registration database electronically. It saves millions in time and energy.
The Senate also approved a way for families with disabled children to pay for their special needs without facing a tax. It's called the ABLE bill.
What a lot of people don't realize is if you're a parent and you pass away, you can't even will these kids part of your estate because they're by law not allowed to have it. This will allow them to have it so they can then provide for their own families long after they're gone.
The Senate and House Conference Committee worked through long and serious negotiations, agreeing to a bill that provides across-the-board income tax relief while helping small business be more competitive, reducing their state income tax to zero on the first $250,000 in revenue.
Ultimately, we end in this biennium where we wanted to be, and that's 100% on the first $250,000 in revenue for small businesses, not subject to Ohio income tax, and then a flat 3% thereafter. Make no mistake, 70% of the jobs in this state are small businesses. We want to grow and strengthen our economy. We've got to make sure we're helping the job creators.
And make sure you tune into our social media channels for any potential changes that could be made to the budget with the governor, since he does have line item veto power. And you can find those changes, all the latest updates, on those channels at Ohio Senate GOP, at Ohio Senate GOP, and also on the web. It is ohiosenate.gov/Republicans. From the Ohio Senate, I'm John Fortney. On time, balanced, and signed into law, the governor signs a new 2-year budget. The mission to make sure the red, white, and blue flies high, plus the effort to keep monopolies out of the Ohio Constitution, this week from the Ohio Senate. The July 4th holiday weekend, a time to celebrate how you can fly the flag of the red, white, and blue, and also a time to celebrate a 2,800-page document that is balanced. It's the next 2-year state budget. 2,876 pages become part of Ohio history. Senator Keith Faber signed his name to the bill, which was later signed into law by Governor John Kasich. More than $1.8 billion in tax cuts, a record investment in K-12 education, and a 2-year tuition freeze for college students.
We have have a remarkable higher education plan that's going to keep all tuition at all state colleges and universities flat for the next 2 years, 0% increases. We're going to require the colleges and universities to reduce student costs to get a degree by 5%.
The Senate also worked to pass a bipartisan constitutional amendment for November. It's designed to stop efforts by well-financed campaigns from using a statewide vote to pass constitutional protection for their business or industry. This would effectively keep this fall's marijuana campaign from receiving monopoly rights as the only grow operation in the state.
Simply put, this language says if you're trying to get a commercial fiat, right, or privilege that is unique and not available to all other Ohioans, don't come looking to buy the Ohio Constitution.
In other words, voters will decide whether they wish to authorize drug cartels in the state of Ohio. And I would hope that most Ohioans would say, nah, we're not too wild about drug cartels in the state of Ohio.
Independence Day is a time to fly the flag and celebrate the country's birthday. The Senate passed a bill to make sure Ohioans have a right to do so regardless of where they live. The need came from a military family who was told by their neighborhood association they couldn't fly the flag. And many will be hitting the highway to celebrate the 4th. Distracted driving is a serious concern, with drivers often looking at their smartphone instead of the road. Electronic ODOT highway signs will remind drivers during the holiday weekend about the danger. The Senate passed Senator Jim Hughes' bill targeting distracted driving.
Unfortunately, we're seeing an awful lot more people that are getting behind the wheel, they're not concentrating what's going on, they're distracted, and what's happening is Ohioans are getting hurt and or killed. What this bill is about is to save lives.
The budget debate came with long hours, sometimes overnight, with differences on spending policy. But in the end, across-the-board income tax cuts left more money with the taxpayer instead of the government. And for all the updates on pending legislation coming out of the Ohio Senate, make sure you tune into our social media channels. That's at Ohio Senate GOP, at Ohio Senate GOP. Also on the web, that's ohiosenate.gov/Republicans. I'm John Fortney from the Ohio Senate.